This Christmas Eve, I sat across from my sister in the family mediator she hired. Between us lay a thick folder labeled Problem File. She believed tonight was my intervention, a public shaming designed to make her look like a saint. But Madison missed one detail. The neutral mediator had already reviewed every email and bank statement I sent beforehand. The only person about to be exposed at this dinner table was not me. My name is Ava Flores. I am 31 years old, and I live alone in a compact, drafty apartment in North Denver, Colorado. To my landlord, I am the quiet tenant who always pays rent on the first of the month. To my clients, I am a reliable professional who answers emails at 2 a.m. But here, in the zip code of Silver Ridge, I am simply the eccentric daughter. I am the problem that needs to be solved, the error in the code of an otherwise flawless operating system. I parked my 10-year-old sedan 3 houses down from my parents' driveway because I knew the driveway would already be full. I was right. A pristine white SUV sat next to my father's luxury sedan, gleaming under the street lamps. The air in Silver Ridge always felt thinner to me, sharper, as if the oxygen itself had been filtered to remove impurities. I sat in my car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. In years past, this was the moment I would have hyperventilated. I would have checked my makeup in the rearview mirror, terrified that a smudge of mascara would be interpreted as a sign of mental instability. I would have rehearsed apologies for things I had not done. Tonight was different. I checked my reflection, not for flaws, but for resolve. I smoothed the lapel of my blazer. It was new, purchased with my own money, tailored to fit perfectly. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up my leather tote bag. It was heavy. Inside rested a sleek silver USB drive, a thick stack of documents printed in high-resolution color, and a sealed manila envelope. I felt the weight of it against my hip as I stepped out into the biting December cold. It felt like armor. The front door of the Flores residence was adorned with a wreath that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I did not have to knock. The door swung open before I could touch the bell, revealing the perfectly curated warmth of a Silver Ridge Christmas. The entryway smelled of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and expensive pine candles. Gold and silver ornaments glittered from the 12-foot tree in the foyer. It looked like a postcard. It looked like a scene from a movie where everyone is happy and nothing hurts, but the air was wrong. Usually, the house would be filled with the chatter of a cocktail hour, the clinking of crystal glasses, the smooth jazz playlist my father curated. Instead, there was a hushed, vibrating tension. It felt less like a holiday gathering and more like a hospital waiting room before a surgeon delivers bad news. My mother, Karen, stood by the staircase. She was wearing a cashmere sweater set in a soft cream color that made her look fragile and elegant. When she saw me, her smile did not reach her eyes. "You made it," she said. Her tone suggested she had lost a bet regarding my arrival. I nodded and stepped inside, closing the door against the winter wind. "Hello, Mom." She did not hug me. She gestured vaguely toward the living room. "Everyone is waiting. We did not want to start without you." I walked into the main living area. My father, Douglas, was standing by the fireplace, swirling a glass of scotch. He looked at me, gave a stiff nod, and said, "Ava, you are here. That is good." And then there was Madison. My sister stood in the center of the room, commanding the space as she always did. She wore a red velvet dress that was festive yet modest, her hair falling in perfect, glossy waves around her shoulders. She looked radiant. She looked victorious. Upon seeing me, she let out a breathy sigh, as if she had been holding her breath from sheer worry. "Ava," she said, rushing forward. She wrapped her arms around me. It was a performance hug. It was the kind of hug you give someone when you know people are watching. Light and brief, ensuring no actual warmth is transferred. She pulled back almost immediately, her hands lingering on my arms as she scanned my face with a look of practiced concern. "I am so glad you decided to come," she said, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal. "We were worried you might bail. You know how you get when things are overwhelming." I stared at her. "I am fine, Madison. I would not miss Christmas. She offered a tight, pitying smile, then immediately pivoted away from me, dropping her hands as if touching me had been a chore. She reached out and grabbed the hand of the man standing behind her. "You remember Jason, right?" she asked, pulling him forward. Jason Reed. I knew him mostly from Madison's social media feed, where he appeared as the devoted partner in endless photos of apple picking, wine tasting, and beach sunsets. In person, he looked like a decent man who was currently very uncomfortable. He worked for Frontier Link Freight, a logistics corporation, a fact my parents mentioned constantly because it sounded stable and corporate. "Hi, Ava," Jason said, offering a hand. "Good to see you." My parents beamed. The change in their demeanor was instantaneous. My father stepped forward, clapping Jason on the shoulder. "Jason was just telling us about the new distribution hub FrontierLink is opening in Nevada," my father said, his voice booming with approval. "Fascinating stuff. Real infrastructure. That is the kind of work that keeps the country moving," Mom chimed in, handing Jason a napkin for his drink. "Madison is so lucky to have someone with such a solid head on his shoulders. We were just saying how rare that is these days." They stood there, the four of them, forming a tight, impenetrable unit of success and approval. I stood on the periphery, clutching my bag. The dynamic was so familiar, it was almost boring. Madison was the sun. Jason was the planet she had captured to prove her gravitational pull, and my parents were the worshipful astronomers. I was the space debris floating aimlessly in the dark. "Dinner will be in 20 minutes, Madison announced, taking charge. "But before we sit down to eat, we need to handle the main event." She gestured toward the sunroom at the back of the house. I looked past her shoulder. The furniture in the sunroom, usually arranged for casual reading or coffee, had been moved. 4 armchairs and a love seat were arranged in a tight circle. On a small table in the center of the circle sat a box of tissues and a pitcher of water. It looked exactly like an interrogation room dressed up as a therapy session. My stomach tightened, but I forced my breathing to remain even. I knew this was coming. Madison had been hinting at it for weeks, sending cryptic texts about healing and fresh starts. "I think we should introduce Ava to our guest first," Mom said, her voice dropping to a whisper. A man stepped out from the hallway leading to the kitchen. He had been standing there quietly, observing us. He looked to be in his early 40s, dressed in a casual but expensive sweater and corduroys. He had the kind of face that was aggressively neutral calm, non-judgmental, and professional. He held a notebook. "Ava, this is Rowan Hale," Madison said, her voice dripping with benevolence. "Rowan is a mediator from Evergreen Mediation and Family Services. I hired him to join us tonight." Rowan stepped forward and extended a hand. His grip was firm. "Hello, Ava. I know having a stranger at Christmas dinner is unorthodox, but Madison reached out to me because she cares very deeply about the harmony of this family." I looked at Rowan. He had kind eyes, but they were sharp. He was scanning me, looking for the cracks Madison had told him were there. He was looking for the instability, the anger, the defensiveness. I shook his hand. "Hello, Rowan. It is certainly a choice to spend your Christmas Eve working." He smiled politely. "I believe that resolving conflict is the best gift a family can give one another." Madison stepped between us, placing a hand on Rowan's arm as if they were co-conspirators. "Exactly. That is exactly why I brought him here. Look, Ava, I know this looks intense, but we cannot keep pretending everything is fine. We cannot have another holiday where we are walking on eggshells because of your situation, my situation, the vague, all-encompassing term she used to describe my entire existence." Mom nodded fervently. "We just want you to be happy, Ava. We want you to be functional." Madison went to great lengths to arrange this. Evergreen Mediation is the best in the state. This is a safe space. A safe space. The weaponized therapy language hung in the air. "Let us go sit," Madison said, ushering us toward the circle of chairs. "We can do the session before the turkey comes out. Better to get the hard work done so we can enjoy the meal with clear hearts." She guided us into the sunroom like a shepherd herding unruly sheep. Madison took the seat next to Jason, interlacing her fingers with his. My parents sat together on the love seat, looking solemn and righteous. Rowan took a single chair, opening his notebook and clicking a pen. That left one chair. The chair directly opposite Madison, the seat of the accused. I walked over to it. I did not sit down immediately. I placed my heavy leather bag on the floor beside the chair, making sure it stood upright. I unbuttoned my blazer and sat down, crossing my legs. I looked at the faces around me. My mother looked anxious but hopeful, as if she were about to witness an exorcism. My father looked stern, ready to enforce the rules. Jason looked at the floor, clearly wishing he were anywhere else on the planet. And Madison looked at me with a mask of tragic love. But beneath it, I saw the gleam. She was enjoying this. She had set the stage, hired the director, and cast herself as the suffering saint. She believed that by the end of this hour, I would be crying, apologizing, and admitting that I was the failure she had always claimed I was. She thought she was about to cement her status as the savior of the Flores family. Rowan cleared his throat. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice measured and soothing. "Madison has shared with me some of the challenges this family has faced regarding communication and boundaries. Specifically, concerns about Ava's path and how it impacts the family dynamic." He looked at me. "Ava, I want you to know that you are not on trial here. This is a facilitated dialogue. Madison's goal, as she stated to me, is to help you find stability so that you do not sabotage your future or your relationships with the people who love you." I kept my face blank. I did not roll my eyes. I did not sigh. I simply nodded. Madison leaned forward, her voice trembling slightly for effect. "Ava, I did this because I love you. I hired Rowan because I cannot watch you spiral anymore. The financial instability, the lies, the way you cut us out. It hurts Mom and Dad. I just want to help you fix it. I want to help you not ruin another Christmas." My mother sniffled loudly. "We just want our daughter back," she whispered. The narrative was being spun in real time. In their version of reality, I was the disaster. I was the one who needed an intervention. I was the problem file. I felt the cold leather of my bag against my ankle. Inside that bag was the truth. Inside that bag were 3 years of bank statements showing a 6-figure income. Inside that bag was a contract with a major tech firm listing me as their lead consultant. Inside that bag were printed screenshots of text messages where Madison asked me for money, and emails where my mother told me I was an embarrassment. I had almost stayed home, 2 days ago, when the invite came with its passive-aggressive demand for my presence. I had almost thrown my phone across the room and booked a flight to Mexico. I had almost let them win by default. But then I realized that simply leaving would only confirm their story. If I was not there, Madison could paint whatever picture she wanted. She could tell them I was ungrateful, crazy, lost. So I decided to come. But I did not come as the daughter they remembered. I did not come as the girl who cried in her room while Madison blew out the candles on the cake. I came as the CEO of my own life. I looked at Madison. She was squeezing Jason's hand, performing her distress perfectly. She thought she had trapped me. She thought she had hired a referee to validate her fouls. Rowan looked at me, waiting for a reaction. "Ava, do you have any initial thoughts before we ask Madison to share her specific concerns?" I reached down and rested my hand on the handle of my bag. I felt the cool metal of the zipper. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the humid tension of the room, "I do." I looked directly at my sister. Her eyes flickered with a moment of confusion. She had expected tears. She had expected shouting. She had not expected this calm. Madison thinks she hired a judge to sentence me. I thought to myself, she believes she purchased a victory. She has no idea that the check she wrote to Evergreen Mediation just bought her a front-row seat to her own exposure. "Madison," I said aloud, smiling a smile that did not reach my eyes but showed plenty of teeth. "I think this is a wonderful idea. Transparency is exactly what this family needs. In fact, I brought some materials to help us with that." I patted the bag. Madison's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She did not know what was in the bag. She did not know that the mediator she paid for was ethically bound to consider all evidence presented. She did not know that the story she had been telling for a decade was about to collide with a paper trail. She thought she was directing a play. She never imagined that tonight. Her entire carefully staged life was going to be replayed for the audience, and this time, I had brought the subtitles. To understand why I brought a folder of legal documents to a holiday dinner, you have to understand the soil in which the Flores family tree was planted. We lived in Silver Ridge, a suburb that felt less like a neighborhood and more like a curated exhibit of the American dream. It was a place where the grass was not just green, it was a specific, homeowner association-mandated shade of emerald. It was a community of two-story colonials and sprawling ranch houses, where every driveway hosted a freshly washed SUV and every mailbox was free of rust. In Silver Ridge, success was not a private achievement, it was a public performance. If you were doing well, you had to look like you were doing well, or else it did not count. My parents, Douglas and Karen, were the quintessential curators of this lifestyle. They did not just live in the house, they managed it like a brand, and like any good brand managers, they knew exactly which products to feature in the window display and which ones to keep in the stockroom. Madison was the flagship product. She was the golden child, a term I use not with bitterness, but with scientific accuracy. From the moment she could walk, she understood the assignment. She had the glossy blonde ringlets that bounced when she walked, the kind that strangers felt compelled to touch in the grocery store, while cooing about how angelic she looked. She had a smile that turned on like a halogen lamp, bright and blinding, obliterating any shadows in the room. Madison played soccer, not because she liked the sport, but because she looked good in the uniform and scored goals when the other parents were watching. She joined the student council, the choir, and the debate team. She was the center of every photograph, her chin tilted up, her eyes catching the light perfectly. I was different. I was the stock that did not move. I was dark-haired, quiet, and perpetually awkward in my own limbs. While Madison was practicing her smile in the mirror, I was in my bedroom, hunched over a second-hand desktop computer I had salvaged from a garage sale. I was obsessed with the things that happened behind the scenes. I loved reading code, tinkering with pirated versions of photo editing software, and understanding how images were constructed. I found comfort in the digital world because it was logical. If something was broken, you could press undo. If a color was wrong, you could adjust the saturation. Real life in the Flores household did not offer such controls. My parents loved the idea of children, but specifically, they loved the idea of children who could be cited as evidence of their own parenting prowess. At church on Sundays, the dynamic was painfully clear. After the service, families would gather in the vestibule to drink stale coffee and trade accolades. My father would stand with his chest puffed out, one hand resting proudly on Madison's shoulder. Madison got the solo in the Christmas pageant this year. He would announce, his voice carrying just loud enough for the deacon to hear. She is singing "O Holy Night." The choir director says she has perfect pitch. The other adults would nod and smile, offering their congratulations. Madison is such a natural, they would say. She's going to go far. She has that spark. I would be standing 3 feet away, usually examining the pattern of the carpet or sketching in a small notebook I kept hidden in my coat pocket. I was drawing the way the light hit the stained glass, breaking the scene down into geometric shapes and shadows. No one asked what I was drawing. No one asked if I had a solo, if someone happened to glance at me. My mother would offer a quick, dismissive smile and say, "And this is Ava. She is just quiet. She is in her own world." It was a polite way of saying I was a malfunction. The phrase "hard to place" was used often. Madison was easy to place. She belonged on a stage. I belonged in the background, preferably out of focus. The contrast was sharpest during the holidays. Christmas in Silver Ridge was a competitive sport, and the gifts were the trophies. I remember one specific Christmas morning when I was 14 and Madison was 16. We came downstairs in our matching pajamas, another photo opportunity orchestrated by my mother to find the tree buried under a mountain of wrapping paper. Madison tore into her gifts with theatrical glee. That year, she received a brand new iPad and a high-end digital camera. "You have to stay ahead of the trends," my father said. Watching her turn the camera over in her hands, "That is top of the line. You can use it to document your trips with the debate club. We want you to have the best tools to connect with people." I sat on the carpet, holding a rectangular box that felt suspiciously soft. I peeled back the paper to reveal a set of flannel pajamas and a sturdy, sensible winter coat. It was a practical gift. It was a gift that said, "We want you to be warm," but it also said, "We do not expect you to do anything interesting." I looked at the camera in Madison's lap. I had been begging for a camera for 2 years. I had checked out every book on photography from the school library. I knew what aperture and ISO meant before I knew how to drive. "This is nice," I said, forcing a smile. "Thank you for the coat." My mother patted my knee. "We thought about getting you a gadget too." "Ava, but honestly, we know you get frustrated with technology. You are more of a simple soul. You do not need all those distractions. We wanted to get you something practical that you would actually use." They had rewritten my reality to fit their narrative. In their minds, I was incompetent with technology. Despite being the only person in the house who knew how to reset the router or program the thermostat, giving Madison the camera was not just a gift, it was a statement. They believed she was the one worthy of capturing the world. I was merely meant to exist in it, warm and silent. This dynamic extended to discipline as well. In a house obsessed with perfection, accidents were treated as moral failings, but the distribution of blame was never equal. If a glass shattered in the kitchen, my mother would call out my name before she even entered the room. "Ava, what did you break one afternoon?" I came home from school to find my father staring at a scratch on the side of his car. He was red-faced with fury. "You were riding your bike too close to the driveway," he accused the moment I walked through the door. "Look at this. You scratched the paint." "I have not ridden my bike in 3 months," I said calmly. "It has a flat tire. It is hanging in the garage." He waved his hand, dismissing my defense. "Well, you probably dragged your backpack against it then. You are always so careless. Ava, you occupy space without thinking about the consequences." Madison would never be this clumsy. She respects our property. I found out weeks later that Madison had actually scraped the car while trying to park her own vehicle, a convertible my parents had helped her buy. She had told them it must have been a shopping cart at the mall. They believed her instantly. When the truth came out that the scratch paint matched her bumper, they laughed it off at dinner. "Oh, that Madison," my father chuckled, pouring wine. "She is just so eager to get places. She has a lead foot, just like her grandfather." The scratch that was a sign of my carelessness was transformed into a charming quirk when it belonged to Madison. I learned then that the truth did not matter in Silver Ridge. What mattered was who was telling the story. As I grew older, I learned to survive by making myself smaller. I stopped arguing. I stopped trying to prove I was innocent. I realized that if I stood outside the frame, I could not be criticized for ruining the picture. I became the family photographer. Not because I wanted to serve them, but because holding the camera in front of my face was a valid excuse to hide. "Come on, Ava, take a picture of us," Madison would chirp, pulling our parents into a hug. I would lift the camera, focus the lens, and watch them through the viewfinder. In that small rectangle of glass, they looked perfect. They looked like the family they pretended to be. And I was safely on the other side, unseen and unheard. But there was one singular moment in my junior year of high school, where I forgot the rules. I let myself believe that merit could pierce the bubble of their indifference. I had entered a statewide design contest for a public service campaign about clean water. I spent weeks on the library computer, layering textures, choosing typography, and creating a poster that was stark, modern, and arresting. I did not tell anyone I was doing it. I wanted the victory to be mine alone. When the results were posted, my name was at the top of the list. First place. There was a cash prize of $500 and a gala where the winning designs would be displayed. I walked home that afternoon with the acceptance letter in my backpack. my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt a strange sensation I had never felt before hope. I thought, surely, this is undeniable. This is not an opinion. This is an award. This proves I'm good at something. I walked into the kitchen. My mother was chopping vegetables for a salad. My father was at the table, reading a business journal. Madison was painting her nails at the counter, talking about prom themes. I have something to show you, I said. I pulled the letter and the printed proof of my poster out of my bag. I laid them on the table in front of my father. I won the state design challenge, I said. My voice shook a little. Out of 3,000 entries, I won first place. My father looked down at the paper. He adjusted his reading glasses. He read the letter, then looked at the poster. It was a digital collage of a drying riverbed overlaid with bold, blue text. My mother wiped her hands on a towel and came over to look. "Oh," she said, "that is very dramatic. It is a design contest." I explained. "It is supposed to be impactful." My father pushed the paper back toward me. "It is certainly colorful." "Ava, but you know, I was looking at your report card last week. Your chemistry grade is slipping. You have a B-. I won." "Dad," I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "Did you see the part about the prize $500? That is pocket change in the real world." "Ava," he said, his voice dropping into the lecture tone I knew so well. "Look, it is fine to have hobbies. Doodling is fine. But you cannot let this distract you from serious work. You are not going to make a living drawing pictures on a computer. People do not pay for this. They pay for logistics. They pay for management. They pay for real skills." Madison looked up from her nails, blowing on the wet polish. "Yeah, Ava," she added, "do not be a starving artist. It is kind of a cliché. Besides, prom is coming up. Maybe you can use that prize money to buy a dress that actually fits this year." My father nodded in agreement. "Madison is right. Be practical. Do not let this go to your head. We do not want you chasing pipe dreams and ending up with nothing. Now, clear this off the table. We need to set up for dinner." I stood there for a long minute. I looked at the poster I had poured my soul into. I looked at the letter that confirmed I had talent. And then I looked at my family, who saw only a distraction. They did not see the work. They did not see the achievement. They only saw something that did not fit into the script they had written for me. I picked up the papers. I did not cry. I did not scream. I walked upstairs to my room, opened the drawer of my desk, and slid the award to the back, underneath a stack of old textbooks. That night, I sat in the dark and made a promise to myself. I promised that I would never again bring a victory into this house to be slaughtered. I promised that my success would belong to me and me alone. In Silver Ridge, families are like perfectly composed photographs. Everyone has a place, everyone has a pose, and the lighting is always flattering. But if you are the person who does not fit the aesthetic, if you are the shadow in the corner or the blur on the edge, they do not try to adjust the focus to see you clearer. They do not try to understand why you are different. They simply crop you out. And that night, at 17 years old, I realized that if they were going to crop me out of their picture, I was going to have to build a frame of my own. The divergence of our paths after high school was so sharp it felt like a physical tear in the fabric of the family. For Madison, the world opened up like a grand set of double doors. She was accepted into Westmont Harbor University, a private liberal arts college in California that cost more per semester than most people in this country earn in 3 years. My parents did not just pay her tuition. They invested in her lifestyle. They leased her a brand new compact SUV because she needed to be safe on the coastal highways. They rented her a 1-bedroom apartment off campus because the dorms were deemed too distracting for a mind as bright as hers. For me, the conversation was shorter. It took place at the kitchen table while my father was paying bills. He told me that Rocky Valley Community College was a sensible choice. He said that given my academic history, which was perfectly average, and my lack of clear direction, it would be foolish to waste money on a university experience I might not appreciate. He told me I needed to learn the value of $1. So, while Madison was driving toward the Pacific Ocean with a trunk full of new clothes, I moved into a 300-square-foot studio apartment in a neighborhood north of Denver that real estate agents politely described as up and coming. The building was a brick block from the 1970s that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke. The heating system was a radiator that clattered and banged throughout the night, singing a metallic lullaby that kept me awake more often than not. To pay for my rent and my tuition, I took a job at a 24-hour coffee shop downtown. My shift was the graveyard rotation, from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. It was the shift nobody wanted, which meant it was the only one available to a student with no experience. Those winters were brutal. I remember walking to the bus stop at 9:30 at night, the wind cutting through my coat, the snow crunching under my boots. I would spend 8 hours making cappuccinos for tired paramedics, long-haul truckers, and students pulling all-nighters. My hands were always dry from the sanitizer and the hot water. My clothes always smelled of roasted beans and burnt milk. But the real work began when I got home. While the sun was coming up over the Rockies, I would sit at a wobbly card table I had dragged in from the alley. I would open my second-hand laptop, which hummed loudly as it struggled to run modern software. I did not have the money for boot camps or master classes. I had the internet. I spent hours watching tutorials on YouTube at double speed. I lurked on design forums, reading threads about typography, color theory, and user experience. I downloaded trial versions of design software and learned to crack the codes so I could keep using them after the 30 days were up. My parents were theoretically a phone call away, but the distance felt interstellar. When they did call, it was usually a brief check-in on Sunday afternoons. The conversations followed a script that never varied. My mother would ask if I was eating enough vegetables. My father would ask if I was keeping my grades up. And then, invariably, the conversation would pivot to Madison. "Madison loves California," my mother would say, her voice brightening. "She pledged a sorority last week. It is very exclusive. We are so proud of her for putting herself out there." Or my father would chime in, "She got an internship at a marketing agency in Santa Monica. It is unpaid, of course, but the exposure is priceless. We are sending her a little extra this month to cover her networking expenses. You have to spend money to make money." Ava. They never asked about my expenses. They never asked how I was managing rent or textbooks. To them, my life was a holding pattern. I was treading water until I inevitably failed or found a husband to take over the burden. Madison's life, as viewed through social media, was a technicolor dream. I would sit in my dim apartment, eating instant noodles seasoned with hot sauce, and scroll through photos of her beach bonfires, her tailgate parties, her brunches with girls who all looked exactly like her. She was living the life I was told I was too awkward to handle, but something was happening in the silence of my apartment. I was getting better. I started taking small jobs from anonymous posters on Reddit and freelance job boards. At first, it was simple work. Someone needed a banner for their gaming channel. Someone needed a flyer for a bake sale. I did them for $10, $20. I treated every $5 job like it was a commission for a Fortune 500 company. I obsessed over kerning. I debated color palettes. I learned how to talk to clients, how to interpret their vague requests into visual reality. The turning point came on a Tuesday in November. I had bid on a project to design a logo for a small artisanal soap company based in Vermont. The client was picky. She wanted something that looked organic but modern, feminine but strong. I did 4 revisions. I stayed up until 3 in the morning tweaking the curvature of a leaf icon. When I finally sent the files, I held my breath. An hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the payment app. "You have received $300. I sat there in my kitchen, staring at the screen. $300. It was more than I made in 3 nights of standing on my feet at the coffee shop. It was money that came from my brain, from my eye, from my hand. It was money generated by the very thing my father had told me was a waste of time. I laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound in the empty room. I felt a surge of adrenaline that was better than any caffeine. I realized then that the narrative was wrong. They had told me art was a hobby. They had told me creativity was a garnish, not the meal. They were wrong. This was a trade. This was a skill. and I was good at it. The next day, I showed the design to Naomi, a girl I sat next to in my intro to business class. Naomi was sharp, cynical, and the first person in my life who looked at me without a filter of disappointment. She looked at the soap logo on my screen, then looked at me. "You made this?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. It is for a client in Vermont." Naomi zoomed in on the vector lines. "Ava, this is legit. This is better than the stuff the college uses for its own brochures. Why are you just doing one-off gigs? You should formalize this." I shook my head. "It is just a side hustle. I am just trying to pay for books." Naomi slammed her notebook shut. "Stop that. Stop apologizing. You are a business. Give it a name. Make a website. Charge more. This is not a hobby anymore." That night, I did not sleep. I sat at my wobbly table and stared at the blinking cursor. I needed a name. I thought about my life, about how lost I felt in the shadow of my family, about how I had to navigate this cold city by myself. I needed something to guide me. I typed 2 words. North Star Studio. It sounded professional. It sounded established. It sounded like it had a glass-walled office and a receptionist, not a girl in sweatpants eating toast at 4 a.m. I registered the domain name for $12. I built a portfolio site using the 3 projects I had done. I listed my services: branding, identity, digital strategy. I was 20 years old. I had no degree, no capital, and no connections. But I had North Star Studio. My parents knew none of this. When I called them the following week, the conversation was business as usual. "How is school?" my father asked. "It is fine," I said. "I am getting A's." "Good," he said, sounding bored. "Have you thought about what you are going to do this summer?" I was playing golf with Bob Miller, and he said his insurance firm might need a filing clerk. "It is minimum wage, but it is an office environment. It would be good for you to see how the real world operates." I looked at my screen, where I was currently negotiating a $600 contract for a fitness app interface. "Thanks, Dad," I said. "I will think about it, but I think I might take some summer classes." "Suit yourself." He sighed. "Madison is going to Italy for a study abroad program. She's going to study Renaissance art history. It is going to be such a cultural expansion for her." I hung up the phone and felt a strange sense of peace. For years, their neglect had felt like a punishment. It had felt like I was being starved of oxygen. But now, I realized it was a gift. Because they did not care what I was doing. They were not watching. Because they assumed I was incompetent. They never asked for details. I was invisible to them, and in that invisibility, I found total freedom. I could try things. I could fail. I could take risks. I could build an entire career from my kitchen table, and there was no one there to tell me it was impossible. There was no audience waiting to boo if I tripped. There was no pressure to be the golden child. I looked out the window at the gray Denver sky. Snow was starting to fall again. My apartment was cold, and my bank account was still low. But for the first time in my life, the person looking back at me in the reflection of the window was not a disappointment. She was the founder of North Star Studio, and she was just getting started. The breakthrough did not happen with fireworks. It happened with a latte menu. I had done a quick design job for a local art cafe in the trendy River District of Denver. It was a simple project, just a typographic refresh for their seasonal menu, but I had poured my usual obsession into it, choosing a font that felt like handwriting but remained legible, and selecting a paper stock that felt heavy and expensive in the hand. I charged them $200 and a month of free coffee. 2 weeks later, I received an email from a generic Gmail address. The subject line was simply inquiry. My thumb hovered over the delete button. I assumed it was spam, or perhaps a bot trying to sell me search engine optimization services. But something made me open it. The email was brief. It read, "I saw your work at the Roasted Bean. I like how you handle negative space. My startup is looking for a brand identity. Are you taking new clients?" I almost laughed, I replied, half expecting to be asked for my bank account details by a prince in a faraway land. Instead, I got a calendar invite for a video call. When I logged on the next day, I was not met by a scammer. I was met by two exhausted-looking engineers in a glass-walled office in Seattle. They were building a platform for decentralized cloud storage, and they had the technology, but they looked like a high school science project. They needed to look like a corporation. We talked for an hour. For the first time, I was not the quiet girl in the corner. I was the expert. I told them their color palette was too aggressive. I told them their logo looked like a warning sign. I spoke with a fluency I did not know I possessed. When it came time to discuss the fee, I froze. I had been charging $50 for logos. I took a breath, remembered Naomi's voice in my head, and quoted a number that felt nauseatingly high. They did not blink. "Okay," one of them said. "Send over the contract." I closed my laptop and sat in the silence of my studio apartment. My hands were shaking. The deposit alone was equal to 3 months of my wages as a barista. I looked at the peeling paint on my wall and realized that the wall did not matter anymore. I had just bought my way out. I delivered the project 3 weeks later. The startup launched with my branding, my logo, and my user interface design. They looked sleek, professional, and formidable. They looked like they belonged in the future. A month later, I received another email. This one was not from a generic address. It was from Miles Harrington. I knew the name. Anyone who read the design blogs knew the name. Miles Harrington was a legend in the world of corporate identity. He ran Harrington and Bay Insight, a consultancy firm that handled branding for Fortune 500 companies. He was the kind of man who charged 5 figures just to have lunch with you. The email said, "The Seattle team speaks highly of you. I would like to buy you a coffee." We met at a diner halfway between downtown and the suburbs. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing my only blazer, clutching a portfolio I had printed at the copy shop that morning. Miles walked in right on time. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite, but his eyes were crinkled with a perpetual, observant humor. He did not look at my portfolio. He ordered a black coffee and asked me who I was. I found myself telling him everything. I told him about the community college. I told him about the night shift at the coffee shop. I told him about learning to code on a radiator that hissed. And then, because he had a way of listening that made silence feel safe, I told him about Silver Ridge. I told him about my family, about how they saw creativity as a defect, about how I was the invisible daughter in a family of stars. I expected him to give me a pat on the head. I expected him to tell me to keep working hard, and maybe one day I would earn their respect. Instead, Miles set his coffee cup down with a deliberate clink. He looked me in the eye and said, "Ava, you are operating under a misconception. You think your family is turning you down because you are noise. They are turning you down because you are a signal they do not know how to decode." He leaned forward. "You have a voice. It is distinct. It is sharper than you think. Do not let them turn down the volume of your life just to make themselves comfortable. If they cannot hear the music, that is a problem with their ears, not your instrument." He then slid a folder across the table. "This is a project I am too old and too tired to handle," he said. "It is messy, it requires speed, and it requires someone who understands how to make complex things look simple. I think you are the person for it." I opened the folder. The header read, "Helio Ridge Capital." It was a private equity firm that was launching a new branch dedicated to clean technology and renewable energy infrastructure. They needed everything: name, logo, website, investor deck, press kit. They needed to look trustworthy enough to handle millions of dollars, but innovative enough to save the planet. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice small. "This looks huge." Miles smiled. "It is huge. Do not mess it up." I did not sleep for the next month. I quit the coffee shop job, terrifying my landlord, and turned my apartment into a war room. I pinned sketches to the walls. I researched color psychology. I studied the visual language of solar panels and wind turbines. I created a brand identity that was deep navy and burnished gold. It was serious, heavy, and expensive. It looked like old money investing in new power. When I presented the final pitch to the board of Helio Ridge Capital via Zoom, I wore pajama bottoms and my blazer, but my voice did not shake. I walked them through the logic of the design. I showed them how the logo worked on a business card and on the side of a building. There was a silence when I finished. Then, the CEO nodded. "This works," he said. "This really works." 6 months later, Helio Ridge Capital closed their first round of funding. They raised $9 million. My logo was on the front page of the financial news websites. My phone started ringing, not with calls from my mother, but with calls from creative directors, marketing VPs, and startup founders. Miles Harrington had whispered my name in the right rooms, and now, North Star Studio was no longer a girl at a wobbly table. It was a player. I followed Miles's advice to the letter. I registered North Star Studio as a limited liability company. I opened a business banking account. I hired an accountant. And then, the biggest step of all, I moved out of my apartment. I rented a dedicated desk in a co-working space in a renovated warehouse in the Arts District. It had exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and huge windows that let in actual sunlight. I bought a professional ergonomic chair. I bought a monitor the size of a television. I bought a coffee maker that did not burn the beans. Every morning, I swiped my keycard to enter the building, and every morning, I felt a jolt of electric pride. I was building something real. I was building something that belonged entirely to me. And through all of this, my family knew nothing. It was not that I was hiding it. I simply stopped volunteering information. Our weekly calls had become even shorter. They would talk for 20 minutes about Madison's job, her boyfriend, her apartment, her hair. Then, in the last 30 seconds, my mother would ask, "And how are you?" Ava. Still working at the coffee shop, I had quit the coffee shop 6 months ago. "I am good, Mom." I would say, "Just working? Good." She would sigh, "Keep at it. Stability is key." I learned later, through a cousin who had too much wine at a wedding, what the official family narrative was. Madison had been telling the extended family that I was struggling. She told aunts and uncles that I was lost, that I was barely making rent, and that she often had to send me money just to keep my lights on. It was a brilliant lie because it made her look generous and me look pathetic. It reinforced the roles we had been assigned at birth. Madison, the benevolent queen. Ava, the peasant in need of rescue. She told people, "I worry about her. She just does not have any drive. I think she is living on some kind of government assistance now." It is sad. Really, I could have corrected them. I could have sent a screenshot of my bank balance to the family group chat. I could have mailed them a copy of the magazine article that featured my design for Helio Ridge, but I didn't. Miles had taught me another lesson: power does not need to announce itself. Let them think I am failing. I thought as I sat in my sun-drenched office, signing a contract for another 5-figure project. Let them think I am the charity case. It makes them feel safe. It keeps them away from me. I thought I had escaped. I thought I had built a wall high enough to keep Silver Ridge out. I thought I could just drift away, becoming a stranger to them, living my successful secret life in peace. I was wrong. The message came on the 1st of December. It popped up on my phone while I was reviewing proofs for a new client. It was from my mother. "We expect you for Christmas this year. Madison has arranged something special. We need to talk about your future." It was not an invitation. It was a summons, and then a text from Madison. "Do not embarrass us this time. I have hired someone to help you. Just show up and listen." I stared at the screen. I felt the old familiar tightening in my chest, the reflex to shrink, to apologize, to hide. But then I looked around my office. I looked at the awards on my shelf. I looked at the schedule on my whiteboard. They did not want Ava to come home. They wanted the failure to come home. They needed the loser at the table to make the winner look brighter. They needed a villain for their holiday pageant. I picked up my phone. I did not type a refusal. I typed a single word. "Okay." I put the phone down. I walked over to the filing cabinet where I kept my financial records. I pulled out the tax returns. I pulled out the incorporation papers. I pulled out the bank statements. I realized then that I was not going back to Silver Ridge to be healed. I was going back to testify. I thought I would just keep walking. further and further away from the house with the perfectly cut grass. But a story needs an ending, and my family had written one for me that I refused to act out. They wanted a tragedy. I decided it was time to give them a plot twist. I packed my bag. I was going home for Christmas, but this time, I was bringing my own script. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as I was finishing a conference call with a client in Berlin. My phone buzzed on the desk, a sharp vibration against the oak surface. It was a text from my mother. "Christmas this year is mandatory. Everyone will be home. We have scheduled a session with a family mediator to help you. You need to be here by 4 in the afternoon." I stared at the screen. There was no greeting. There was no inquiry about my schedule. It was not an invitation. It was a subpoena. The wording was precise and cold, stripped of any holiday warmth. "To help you." The phrase hung there, heavy with implication. In the Flores Family Dictionary, help was a synonym for correction. Before I could process the message, a second notification appeared. This one was from Madison. "You should thank me. I found a specialist who is very expensive and very good. It is time you faced reality. Ava, I cannot keep covering for you with Mom and Dad anymore. We are going to fix this." I set my coffee down. My heart began that old, familiar rhythm of anxiety, a thumping drum against my ribs. But this time, underneath the panic, there was a new sensation: curiosity. Covering for me, I had not asked Madison for a favor in 5 years. I had not borrowed a dime. I had barely spoken to her outside of forced birthday calls. What exactly was she covering? The answer came 2 hours later in the form of a phone call from my Aunt Linda. Linda was the family outlier, a woman who drank too much Chardonnay and had a habit of listening at doors. She lived in Arizona but kept her ear to the ground in Silver Ridge. "Ava," she whispered, as if she were calling from a bunker. "Are you really going to this intervention thing?" "Intervention?" I asked, leaning back in my ergonomic chair. "Is that what they are calling it, honey? Madison has been telling everyone that she is staging an intervention for you. She told the whole family you are in deep trouble. She said you are drowning in credit card debt, and that she has been paying your rent for the last year just to keep you off the streets." I felt the blood drain from my face. "She said what?" "She said you are unstable. Ava. She said you have been posting terrible things about the family online and that you are having some kind of mental breakdown. She told your parents that this mediator is the last resort before you. Well, before you do something drastic. They think they are saving your life." I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my office. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a cold, white-hot rage. It was a masterstroke. Madison had not just lied, she had constructed an entire parallel reality. In her version of the world, I was the tragic failure, and she was the suffering saint who was secretly propping me up. If I refused to go to the meeting, I would look like I was in denial. If I went and got angry, I would look unstable. She had rigged the game so that no matter what I did, she won. I opened my phone and scrolled back through years of messages. I found texts from my mother that I had archived but never deleted. "You are an embarrassment to us." One read from 3 years ago, sent after I had worn a thrifted dress to a cousin's wedding. "We are ashamed to introduce you to people." I found another from Madison. "Do not bother coming to Easter. Nobody wants to deal with your moodiness." I started taking screenshots. I created a folder on my desktop and named it "When They Pretend It Wasn't That Bad." I was not doing it for revenge, not yet. I was doing it for sanity. Gaslighting is a powerful drug. It makes you question your own memory. I needed proof that I was not the one who was crazy. That evening, I met Miles for a drink. He saw the look on my face the moment I walked into the bar. "What happened?" he asked. I told him everything. I told him about the mediator, the lies about the rent money, the narrative Madison was spinning. I told him I was thinking about skipping Christmas entirely and sending them a cease and desist letter. Miles swirled the ice in his glass. He looked thoughtful. "You could do that," he said. "You could stay home. You could cut them off, and you would be within your rights. But here's what will happen. Madison will sit in that circle and tell her story to a captive audience. The mediator will nod, your parents will cry, and the legend of Ava the disaster will be cemented forever. You will be the ghost at the feast, guilty in absentia." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "But if you go, you have a chance to break the spell. But you cannot go as the daughter they know. You cannot go looking for their approval. If you go there wanting them to love you, they will eat you alive." "Then how do I go?" I asked. "You go as a CEO," Miles said. "You treat this like a hostile takeover. You bring documentation, you bring facts. Mediators love paper. Ava, they love evidence. If they tell a story, you show a receipt." He pulled a business card from his wallet and slid it across the table. "Call this woman. Her name is Sarah Jenkins. She is a lawyer who specializes in financial abuse and family law. She is not going to represent you in court, because you are not suing them. She is going to coach you on how to present your case." I called Sarah the next morning. She was sharp, brisk, and unsentimental. This is a common tactic. She explained over the phone. It is called DARVO, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. Your sister is playing the victim to hide her own aggression. The mediator is a wild card. If he is good, he will sniff out the lies. If he is lazy, he will side with the person paying the bill. We need to make sure he cannot ignore the truth. She gave me a checklist. Bank statements. She said, 3 years, tax returns, business incorporation papers, leases, and dig up those texts where she asks you for money. If she claims she is supporting you, we need to prove the money never moved. I spent the next 3 days compiling the dossier. I printed my credit reports, which showed a pristine payment history and 0 derogatory marks. I printed the invoices from North Star Studio. I printed the email thread where Madison had asked me to design a logo for her side project for free, which I had politely declined. I also printed the emails from my clients' glowing testimonials about my professionalism, my reliability, my talent. As I organized the papers into a crisp, black binder, I felt a shift inside me. For 31 years, I had let my family write my character. I had let them decide I was weak. I had let them decide I was a burden. I looked at the stack of documents. This was not just paper. This was my life. This was the proof that I existed outside of their imagination. I texted my mother back on the morning of Christmas Eve. "I will be there." I did not add a smiley face. I did not add love. "Ava." I packed my bag. I put on my best suit, the one I wore when I closed the Helio Ridge deal. I checked my reflection in the mirror. The girl who used to hide in the bathroom was gone. The woman looking back at me was ready to negotiate. I drove to Silver Ridge with the radio off. The silence was focusing. I thought about the years of slights, the years of being cropped out of photos, the years of being told I was less than. I was not going there to scream. I was not going there to cry. I was going there to drop a bomb. I pulled into the neighborhood. The houses were lit up with thousands of twinkling lights. It looked beautiful. It looked perfect. But I knew what was rotting underneath the floorboards. I parked the car. I grabbed my bag. I felt the weight of the binder against my side. Most people go home for Christmas to find comfort. Most people go home to find love. I walked up the driveway knowing that I was walking into an ambush, but for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of the trap. I was the one holding the trigger. This Christmas, I did not bring gifts. I did not bring a casserole. I brought witnesses, and they were all printed on 20-pound bond paper, ready to speak. The morning of Christmas Eve did not begin with the smell of gingerbread or the sound of carols. It began with the rhythmic, mechanical whir of my laser printer. In the quiet of my office, the sound was almost hypnotic, a steady pulse that felt less like administrative work and more like the loading of a weapon. I stood over the machine, watching the pages slide into the output tray. Warm and crisp, this was my ammunition. For years, I had fought my family with emotions, with tears, with pleas for understanding. That had been a mistake. You cannot fight a PR campaign with feelings. You have to fight it with data. The first document to emerge was the contract for the Helio Ridge Capital Project. I picked it up and ran my thumb over the header. It was a beautiful piece of legal writing, dense and binding. I flipped to the page that mattered most, the section detailing compensation. The figure was written out in plain black ink, $150,000. It was a consulting fee for 6 months of work. Beside the number was my title. Explicitly stated, Lead Brand Architect. I laid it on the desk. Next came the profit and loss statement for North Star Studio for the current fiscal year. My accountant had sent it over just 2 days ago with a note congratulating me on a record-breaking quarter. The bottom line showed a net profit that was enough to purchase a mid-range 3-bedroom home in the Denver suburbs in cash, without a mortgage, and certainly without a cosigner. Then came the bank statements. This was the tedious part, but necessary. I had downloaded 3 years of transaction history from my personal checking account. I had used the search function to highlight every incoming transfer. There were payments from clients. There were refunds from Amazon. There were Venmo transfers from friends for dinner bills. I took a red pen and circled the absence. I went month by month, page by page. There was not a single transfer from Madison Flores. Not one. There was not a single check deposit from Douglas or Karen Flores. The column was a stark, undeniable desert of zero. Madison's claim that she had been paying my rent, that she had been keeping me afloat, was not just an exaggeration. It was a fabrication so complete it was almost impressive in its audacity. But the pièce de résistance, the document that made my pulse quicken just by looking at it, was a single sheet of paper printed in high-resolution color. It was a screenshot of a text conversation from 4 years ago. Madison had been up for a promotion at her firm, and she had been desperate to appear benevolent and mature to her superiors, who valued community service. The text from Madison read, Ava, I am going to tell Mom and Dad and the guys at work that I'm covering your rent for a few months. It makes me look more responsible if I'm taking care of family. They will respect me more if they think I am a provider. You do not mind, right? It is just a little white lie. Below it was my reply, which I had sent 3 hours later. After agonizing over how to say no without starting a war, I wrote, I do not think that is a good idea. Madison, I pay my own rent. Please do not say that. And then, her final response, a thumbs-up emoji, followed by, you are so dramatic, whatever. She had done it anyway. She had taken that silence and filled it with her own mythology, building a reputation for generosity on the back of my imagined destitution. I slid the paper into a plastic sheet protector. This was the smoking gun. This was the proof that her concern was a performance and her charity was a lie. At 10 o'clock in the morning, I sat down at my computer and composed an email. I addressed it to Rowan Hale, the mediator, and I carbon-copied the general inbox for Evergreen Mediation and Family Services. I wanted this on the official record. Subject preparation for Flores family session. Ava Flores. Dear Mr. Hale, I am writing to provide context for our meeting tonight. I understand that the narrative presented to you is that I am financially unstable and in need of family intervention. To ensure we are working from reality, I have attached a summary of my independent financial standing and professional status. I am coming to this meeting in good faith, but I refuse to participate in a discussion based on falsehoods. I attached the PDFs. I hit send. I did not expect a reply on Christmas Eve, but 20 minutes later, my inbox pinged. It was from Rowan. Dear Ava, thank you for sharing this. I have reviewed the documents. My role is to facilitate communication, but effective communication requires a foundation of truth. The meeting is an opportunity for all parties to be heard fully. I commit to maintaining a neutral space where facts are respected. Then, he added a line that made me pause, a sentence that felt like a subtle nod of solidarity from one professional to another. I have seen this pattern more than you might think. See you at 4. I exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. He knew, or at least, he suspected. He was not walking into that room as Madison's employee. He was walking in as an observer of human behavior, and he had just seen a discrepancy that no amount of sobbing could cover up. At noon, I went to see Miles. I needed to get out of the apartment, needed to see a friendly face before I drove into the lion's den. He was at his office, packing up a few things before heading to his own family gathering. He looked at me, really looked at me, as I walked in. I was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt. "You look like you are going to a funeral," he said. "I feel like I'm going to an execution," I admitted. "Mine." Miles shook his head. He walked over to his bookshelf and pulled out a book on corporate power dynamics. He tossed it on the desk. "Ava, listen to me. Your family worships image. That is their religion. They have a statue of you in their minds, a statue of a messy, incompetent, needy child. As long as you look even remotely like that statue, they will treat you like one." He gestured to my clothes. "You cannot walk in there wearing that. You cannot walk in there looking like the little sister. You need to create a cognitive dissonance. You need to look so different from their expectation that their brains have to reboot the moment they see you." I nodded slowly. I understood. This was branding. I was rebranding myself in real time. I went back to my apartment and opened my closet. I pushed aside the soft, comfortable clothes I usually wore. I reached for the garment bag in the back. Inside was a suit I had bought for the investor pitch in New York last month. It was a charcoal gray wool blend, tailored to within an inch of its life. The trousers were sharp and pleated. The blazer had a structure that made my shoulders look wider, stronger. I put it on. I buttoned the crisp white shirt all the way to the collar. I did not curl my hair like Madison. I straightened it until it was a sleek, dark curtain. I applied makeup, not to look pretty, but to look polished, a matte red lip, a sharp line of eyeliner. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back did not look like she needed to be saved. She looked like she was about to fire someone. I packed my leather tote bag. It was a tactical operation. First, the USB drive. It contained digital copies of every contract, every award, every press release featuring North Star Studio. Second, the manila envelope, sealed with a piece of tape, containing the printed text messages and the bank statements. Third, a letter Miles had written for me by hand on his heavy, cream-colored stationery. It was addressed to whom it may concern. It was a character reference, but it read more like a citation of excellence. It described me as one of the most formidable young talents in the industry. It was a shield made of paper. I zipped the bag. I checked my watch. It was 3 o'clock. I set up my phone on the kitchen counter and hit record on the video camera. I needed to leave a message for myself, a fail-safe in case the gaslighting worked. In case I got there and they started crying and I started to believe that maybe I was the crazy one. Maybe I was the ungrateful daughter. I looked into the lens. "Ava," I said, my voice steady in the empty apartment. "If they try to make you doubt yourself, remember this moment. Remember the work you did. Remember the clients who trust you with their livelihoods. Remember that Madison's story is a product she is selling to feel better about herself. You do not have to buy it." I leaned closer to the camera. "The truth has been printed. It has been signed. It has been paid for. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a woman who built a life from scratch. Do not let them take credit for it, and do not let them tear it down." I stopped the recording. I saved it. I picked up my keys and walked to the door. I took one last look at my apartment. It was small. Yes, it was not a mansion in Silver Ridge, but every inch of it was mine. The rent was paid with money I earned. The lights were kept on by my labor. The air in here was clean. I stepped out into the hallway and locked the door. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy, satisfying thunk. I stood there for a few seconds, my hand resting on the doorknob. If tonight goes wrong, I thought, if it all falls apart, if they scream and shout and disown me, I still have this key. My life was not waiting for me at the dinner table in Silver Ridge. My life was right here, behind this door. And knowing that gave me the courage to walk down the stairs, get into my car, and drive toward the snow-covered suburbs to burn a false idol to the ground. The transition from the dining room to the sunroom felt less like moving between rooms in a family home and more like being transferred from a holding cell to a courtroom. The dinner had been a surreal performance of polite chewing and aggressive silence. My mother had commented on the dryness of the turkey. My father had asked Jason about supply chain logistics 3 separate times. Madison had spent the entire meal checking her watch, clearly eager to get to the main event. When the plates were cleared, Madison stood up. She smoothed the front of her red velvet dress and looked at us with the solemnity of a funeral director. "If everyone could please join us in the sunroom," she said. "We have set up a space where we can talk openly." I followed them down the hallway. The sunroom was a beautiful space, enclosed in glass, looking out over the snow-covered backyard. But tonight, the furniture had been rearranged. The comfortable, chaotic scattering of armchairs was gone. In its place was a tight, perfect circle of 6 chairs. On each chair, there was a folded piece of cardstock, a name tag: Dad, Mom, Madison, Jason, Rowan, Mediator, and finally, Ava. It was absurd. It was the kind of corporate icebreaker tactic that makes human beings feel like inventory, but I did not laugh. I walked to the chair labeled with my name and sat down. I placed my leather bag on the floor next to my right foot, close enough to touch. Rowan took his seat. He opened his notebook, uncapped a pen, and looked around the circle. "Thank you all for agreeing to this format," he said. "The purpose of a circle is to remove hierarchy. Here, everyone is equal. Everyone has a voice." Madison cleared her throat immediately. She sat forward on the edge of her seat, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She turned her body slightly so that she was facing me, but she spoke to the room. "I would like to start, if that is okay," she said. Her voice had a tremor in it, a practiced wobble that suggested she was holding back a dam of emotion. Rowan nodded. "Go ahead, Madison." She took a deep breath and looked at me with wet, shining eyes. "Ava," she began, "I love you. You are my little sister, and because I love you, I cannot sit by and watch you destroy yourself anymore. I organized this tonight not to hurt you, but to save you." She paused for effect. The silence in the room was thick. Jason reached over and squeezed her hand, offering silent support to the brave martyr. "For the last few years," Madison continued, gaining momentum, "we have all watched you spiral. You jump from job to job. You refuse to commit to a real career path. You have isolated yourself in that apartment, and honestly, it is terrifying. We do not know how you are surviving." She turned to our parents. "Mom, Dad, you know what I am talking about. We have had so many phone calls where we are just terrified that Ava is going to end up on the street. She has no savings. She has no plan. And worse, she has become so bitter." She looked back at me, her expression hardening into something that looked like pity, but felt like a blade. "I have seen the things you post online. Ava, the dark, cynical articles, the weird art. It is embarrassing. It makes the family look dysfunctional. People ask me about it at work. They ask me if my sister is okay, and I have to lie. I have to cover for you." My mother let out a soft sob. She pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve and dabbed at her eyes. "It is true," my mother whispered. "It breaks my heart. Ava, we gave you every opportunity. We offered to pay for a university degree. We offered to introduce you to people at your father's firm. You threw it all away to do whatever it is you do on that computer." My father crossed his arms. His face was red, his jaw set. "We are done enabling this. Ava," he said, his voice booming in the small room, "I have worked too hard to build a reputation in this community to have it dragged through the mud because you refuse to grow up. We are ready to cut the cord. If you do not agree to the terms of this mediation, if you do not agree to get professional help and find stable employment, we are cutting off all financial support." I sat very still. I felt a cold, clinical detachment washing over me. It was fascinating to watch. They were threatening to take away something that did not exist. They were threatening to cut a lifeline they had never thrown. Jason looked at me. His expression was a mix of confusion and disappointment. He had clearly been prepped for this. He had been told he was walking into an intervention for a leech, a drain on the family resources. Rowan looked up from his notebook. He tapped his pen against the paper. "I want to clarify something," he said. His voice was neutral, cutting through the emotional fog Madison was generating. "When you say financial support, Douglas, what specifically are you referring to?" My father blinked. He looked momentarily thrown by the request for specifics. Well, he blustered. Everything. The safety net. We have always been there for her. Rowan pressed him. Are you paying for her housing? Are you paying for her groceries? Is there a monthly stipend? My mother jumped in before my father could answer. It is not just about money. Rowan, it is the emotional toll. But yes, we have helped her. We have always made sure she did not starve. It was a non-answer. It was the kind of answer politicians give when they are caught in a scandal. They were relying on the implication of support without technically lying about a specific transaction. But Madison was not as careful as our parents. She was emboldened by the performance. She wanted to drive the nail in the coffin. I have been the one handling the money, Madison said. Turning to Rowan, Mom and Dad are too soft to say it, but I have had to step in. She looked at Jason, then back at me. I have paid her rent, Madison said clearly, multiple times. When she was short, when she was between these little freelance gigs, I used my own money to make sure she did not get evicted. Jason looked at her, surprised. You never told me that. Maddie, Madison sighed, a sound of long-suffering nobility. I did not want to worry you. Jason, I used my personal savings. I did not want to make a big deal out of it. I just wanted to keep a roof over my sister's head. She looked at me with a challenge in her eyes. She was daring me to call her a liar. She believed that I would be too ashamed, too beaten down by the group dynamic to speak up. She thought I would accept the narrative of the charity case because the alternative, calling my successful, perfect sister a liar, seemed impossible. Rowan wrote something down in his notebook. He underlined it twice. So, to be clear, Madison, you are stating that you directly pay Ava's landlord or transfer money to her for housing costs. Yes, Madison said. She did not blink. That is exactly what I'm saying. Rowan turned to me. Ava, he said gently, you have been very quiet. We have heard a lot of serious statements here. Do you have a response to what has been said? I looked around the circle. I looked at my father, puffy with self-righteous indignation over money he had never spent. I looked at my mother, weeping over a tragedy she had invented. I looked at Madison, glowing with the adrenaline of her own lie. I felt the weight of the bag against my leg. I knew exactly which page in the binder contradicted Madison's statement. I knew exactly which bank ledger proved that every cent of rent I had ever paid came from my own hard work. But it was not time yet. If I spoke now, it would just be an argument. It would be her word against mine. I needed them to commit fully. I needed them to put everything on the table so that when I flipped it, nothing would be left standing. I am listening. I said. My voice was calm, lower than usual. I want to hear the full extent of the problem. If I am such a burden, I want to know exactly how deep the resentment goes. Please, continue. Madison looked triumphant. She took my silence as submission. She thought she had broken me. It is not just the money. Ava, she said, her voice gaining a sharper, nastier edge. It is your attitude. You play the victim constantly. You tell people that we neglected you, that we did not support your art. She laughed, a harsh, dismissing sound. We did not support your art because it was not a career. Ava, it was a hobby. And instead of being grateful that we tried to steer you toward reality, you went online and wrote these blogs. You badmouth us to strangers. You refuse to go to therapy. You refuse to date anyone normal. You are 31 years old, and you are alone. She leaned forward, her face twisting into a mask of aggressive concern. There is something wrong with you. Ava, you cannot connect with people. You push everyone away. And honestly, I think you are jealous. I think you look at my life, and Jason, and my career, and you cannot stand that I did it the right way. My father nodded vigorously. She is right, Ava, he said. Madison has carried the torch for this family. She has made us proud. You have made us worry. That is the difference. You are a liability. My mother stopped crying long enough to add her final stone to the pile. We just want you to be normal. Ava. We just want to be able to talk about you at the country club without having to change the subject. Is that so much to ask? The room fell silent. The air was thick with the heat of their accusations. They sat back in their chairs, exhausted but satisfied. They had done it. They had laid out the case. In their minds, the verdict was already in. I was the failure. I was the leech. I was the problem that needed to be solved by their benevolence and Madison's checkbook. Jason looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. He felt awkward, witnessing what he thought was the destruction of a person. Rowan looked at me. His face was unreadable, but his pen had stopped moving. He closed his notebook slowly. "Thank you," he said to the room. "That was very comprehensive." He looked at Madison. "You feel that you have carried the weight of Ava's instability for years. You feel that you have supported her financially and emotionally, and that she has repaid you with resentment." "Yes," Madison said. "That is exactly it. And you, Douglas and Karen." Rowan continued, turning to my parents. "You feel that Ava's lifestyle is a source of shame for the family, and you are ready to sever ties if she does not conform to your expectations. We have no choice," my father said. "We have to draw a line." Rowan nodded. "Okay," he said. "We have the narrative. The picture you have painted is very clear. According to you, Ava is dependent, in debt, unstable, and a financial drain on her sister." He turned his chair slightly so that he was facing me directly. "Ava," he said, "the floor is yours." I looked at them one last time. I looked at the smug satisfaction on Madison's face. She really believed she had won. She believed that by speaking these lies aloud in front of a witness, she had made them true. She thought she had built a cage around me. She did not realize that she had just handed me the keys to the bulldozer. I reached down and unzipped my bag. The sound of the zipper was loud in the quiet room. It sounded like the cocking of a gun. "They think they have finished telling the story," I thought as I reached for the binder. "They think they have built a monument to their own goodness. They have no idea that what they just did was read a confession into the record. And now, it was time for the cross-examination." Rowan turned his chair fully toward me. His movement was deliberate, signaling a shift in the room's gravity. He did not look at me with the pity my family displayed, nor did he look at me with the condescension Madison wore like a crown. He looked at me with professional expectancy. "Ava," he said, his voice dropping an octave, grounding the room, "we have heard a very detailed account of your life from your sister and your parents. They have described a situation of financial dependency, emotional volatility, and professional failure. Now, I am inviting you to speak. Do you accept this description of your reality?" I did not answer immediately. I let the silence stretch. I looked at my mother, who was clutching a tissue as if it were a lifeline. I looked at my father, whose arms were crossed so tightly across his chest they looked like they might snap. I looked at Madison, who was watching me with a slight, victorious smirk, waiting for the tears she was sure would come. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not deny their feelings. I simply asked a question. "We all agree that the truth is very important in this room, right?" I asked. My voice was calm, steady, and completely devoid of the tremble they were expecting. "If we are going to solve a problem, we need to be looking at the same set of facts." Madison rolled her eyes, a gesture so adolescent it almost made me laugh. "Oh, Ava," she sighed. "Stop trying to sound philosophical. Just admit you need help so we can move on." I ignored her. I reached down to the floor and picked up the heavy manila envelope. I placed it on the coffee table in the center of the circle. The sound of the thick paper hitting the glass surface was sharp and definitive. On the front of the envelope, written in bold, black permanent marker, were the words, "Financial and Professional Records, Ava Flores." I unclasped the seal. "I would like to share a few documents," I said, sliding the first stack of papers out, "just to ensure we are all debating the same data set." I picked up the first document. It was a profit and loss statement, stamped and verified by a certified public accountant. "This is the annual revenue report for North Star Studio for the last 3 fiscal years," I said, placing it gently in front of Rowan. "As you can see, the business has been profitable since the first quarter of its operation. The net income for this year alone is sufficient to qualify for a mortgage in this zip code. I pulled out a second sheet. And attached is a letter from my accountant, explicitly stating that all revenue streams are derived from client invoices. It confirms that there have been 0 gifts, 0 loans, and 0 external infusions of cash from any personal accounts. Rowan picked up the paper. He adjusted his glasses. He read the numbers. His eyebrows went up, just a fraction of an inch. Madison let out a short, incredulous laugh. She waved her hand dismissively at the table. "Oh my God," she said, looking at Jason for backup. "She is doing it again. She is making a scene with paper. Who cares about some fake spreadsheet she printed out? We are talking about people. Ava, we are talking about your life, not your little art projects." Rowan did not look up from the document. He raised a hand to silence her. "In mediation, Madison, we care very much about paper," he said. His tone was dry and sharp. "Documentation is not a scene. It is evidence." He passed the profit and loss statement to my father. My father took it reluctantly, as if it might be contagious. He looked at the numbers. I watched his eyes scan the bottom line. I watched the confusion ripple across his face. He was looking at a 6-figure sum. He was looking at a number that was higher than the salary of the junior executives he managed at his logistics firm. "This," my father stammered, "this cannot be right. You work at a coffee shop. I quit the coffee shop 3 years ago." "Dad," I said, "I own a branding consultancy." I reached back into the envelope. "Speaking of which," I said, pulling out the thickest document in the stack, "I want to address the concern that I refuse to work a real job." I placed the contract for the Helio Ridge Capital project on the table. It was bound in a blue cover. I flipped it open to the signature page. "This is a consulting agreement between North Star Studio and Helio Ridge Capital, a private equity firm based in Seattle." I pointed to the line item detailing the compensation. "The retainer fee for this project was $150,000 for 6 months of work," I stated clearly. The room went dead silent. The number hung in the air like a physical object. $150,000. It was not a fortune to a billionaire, but in this room, to these people who had built their entire identity on being the wealthy ones, it was a shockwave. I pointed to the line below the number. "And here is my official role title. Listed in the corporate directory, Lead Brand Architect." My father stared at the document. He looked at the logo on the letterhead. He looked at the signature of the CEO of Helio Ridge, a man whose name appeared in the Wall Street Journal. "This could be fake," my father mumbled, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Anyone can type things up on a computer these days. You were always good with Photoshop. Ava, this is probably just another one of your drawings. I was ready for that." "Rowan," I said, turning to the mediator, "I have also included the digital verification certificate for the electronic signatures, as well as the email chain from the Helio Ridge corporate server confirming the wire transfer of the funds. You can see the routing numbers and the transaction confirmation codes." Rowan flipped the page. He examined the digital audit trail. He nodded slowly. "These look authentic." "Douglas," Rowan said to my father, "the audit trail is verified by a third-party security firm. This is a legally binding commercial contract." I looked at Madison. She was not looking at the contract. She was looking at me with pure hatred. Her narrative was cracking. The helpless little sister. The charity case. The failure. None of those characters commanded fees like this. But I was not done. I had dismantled the professional lie. Now I had to dismantle the personal one. I reached into the envelope for the final stack. "Madison stated earlier that she has paid my rent multiple times," I said, my voice remaining cool and detached. "She stated that she has used her personal savings to keep a roof over my head." I laid out my personal bank statements. I had arranged them side by side, covering the coffee table like a mosaic of financial independence. "These are my personal checking account statements for the last 36 months. I explained. I have highlighted the incoming transfers column on every single page. I pointed to the empty white space in those columns. As you can see, the column is empty. There is not a single transfer from Madison Flores. There is not a single check deposit from her. There is not a single Venmo transaction." I looked directly at Jason. Jason, I said, you work in logistics. You understand how audits work. If money moves, it leaves a trail. If Madison paid my rent? Where is the record? Jason leaned forward. He looked at the statements. He looked at the dates. He looked at the zeros. He looked up at Madison. His brow furrowed. Maddie, he asked softly, you said you wired her $2,000 last month. You said that is why we could not book the cabin trip. Madison's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. I paid it in cash, she snapped. I gave her cash because she does not have a bank account. She is unbanked. That is part of her problem. I pulled the last piece of paper from the envelope. It was the printed screenshot of the text message. I anticipated that response. I said, I placed the photo of the text conversation on top of the bank statements. It was blown up large enough for everyone to read without glasses. This is a text from 4 years ago. I said, I read the text aloud, my voice cutting through the room. Madison wrote, I am going to tell Mom and Dad and the guys at work that I'm covering your rent for a few months. It makes me look more responsible if I'm taking care of family. They will respect me more if they think I'm a provider. You do not mind, right? I pointed to the timestamp. I never agreed to this. I told her no. But she told the story anyway. I looked at my mother. She was reading the text message. Her hand was covering her mouth. She recognized Madison's writing style. She recognized the casual cruelty of it. I looked at Madison. So, I asked, I have a question for the room. In the story Madison told 10 minutes ago, I was the liar. I was the drain on resources. I was the one who needed to be saved. I swept my hand over the table covered in contracts, tax returns, and bank statements. Which part of that story is true? I asked. And which part is the image my sister wanted you to believe? Madison opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked cornered. She looked small. Rowan leaned forward. His demeanor had changed completely. He was no longer the gentle facilitator. He was the investigator who had found the smoking gun. Madison, Rowan said, his voice stern. Douglas, Karen, do you have any documentation that contradicts what Ava has presented? Do you have a single receipt, a single bank transfer record, or a single email that proves you have provided financial support to Ava in the last 3 years? My father sputtered, Well, we bought her dinner at Thanksgiving. Rowan did not blink. Dinner is not rent. Douglas, we are talking about the claim of dependency. Ava has presented irrefutable proof of independence and significant wealth. Do you have a response based on numbers, not feelings? My parents were silent. They stared at the table. They were looking at a version of their daughter they did not recognize, a version that was successful, organized, and powerful, and they hated it. They hated it because it meant they were wrong. It meant their pity was wasted. It meant their superiority was unfounded. Rowan sat back in his chair. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of genuine respect in his eyes. He turned to the group. I think I should disclose something, Rowan said. He paused, ensuring he had everyone's attention. Before this meeting, I received a call from a lawyer named Sarah Jenkins. My mother gasped. A lawyer, Ava. You sued us. I did not sue anyone, I said calmly. Sarah is my advisor. Rowan nodded. She is an attorney specializing in financial abuse and coercive control. She advised me that there might be a significant disparity between the family's narrative and the actual facts. She warned me that the financial claims against Ava might be a form of economic gaslighting. He looked hard at Madison. I have an ethical obligation as a certified mediator. My job is to protect the vulnerable party in the room. I came here thinking that was Ava. He gestured to the documents on the table. But looking at this, it appears the only thing vulnerable in this room is the truth. And I will not allow this session to be used to further a deception. If we are going to continue, we are going to talk about why this family felt the need to invent a failure that does not exist. He closed his notebook with a snap. So, he said, who wants to explain the text message? The room felt like a vacuum just before an explosion. Madison's hands were shaking. Jason was staring at her as if she were a stranger. My parents looked like they had been slapped. I sat back in my chair. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just watched the house of cards begin to sway. They had invited me here to break me. Instead, I had just handed them a mirror, and for the first time in their lives, they could not look away from the reflection. The silence that followed my question was not the peaceful kind. It was the sound of oxygen being sucked out of the room before a backdraft. Madison stared at the table covered in documents, her eyes darting from the bank statements to the contracts as if she could make them disappear by willing it so. When she realized the paper was not going to vanish, her face contorted, the mask of the concerned, loving sister dissolved, replaced by something jagged and ugly. She slammed her hand down on the armrest of her chair. "This is a setup," she hissed. Her voice rose, cracking with a desperation I had never heard before. "You brought me here to ambush me. You printed all of this out just to humiliate me in front of our parents." She looked at Rowan, her chest heaving. "You are letting her do this," she demanded. "I hired you. I am the client here. You are supposed to be facilitating a conversation about her mental health, and instead, you are letting her turn this into a courtroom. Look at her. She is manipulating the entire situation. She is twisting everything to make me look like a villain when I have done nothing but sacrifice for her." She began to cry. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times. Her shoulders shook, her hands covered her face, and she let out a small, wounded sound that was designed to trigger my parents' protective instincts. "She is so cruel." Madison sobbed into her hands. "I try so hard to be a good sister, and she just hates me for it. She is gaslighting you. Mom, she is gaslighting all of you. In the past, this would have worked. My father would have rushed to comfort her. My mother would have glared at me and told me to apologize for upsetting Madison. But tonight, the table between us was not empty. It was covered in black and white proof." My parents looked at Madison, then looked at the documents, and for the first time, they stayed seated. Rowan did not reach for the tissue box. He sat with his hands folded over his notebook, his expression unreadable. "Madison," Rowan said, his voice cutting through her sobs with surgical precision, "we are not in a courtroom. We are in a mediation session, and in this session, the only thing we are examining is the discrepancy between the story you told 10 minutes ago and the evidence lying on this table." He gestured to the bank statements. "You stated that you paid Ava's rent. The records show you did not. You stated Ava is unemployed. The contracts show she is a high-earning consultant. This is not manipulation. This is data. If you feel the data is misleading, please show me the error. Show me the transaction." Madison wiped her eyes aggressively, smearing her mascara. She dropped the crying act instantly when she realized it was not yielding results. "I told you. I paid in cash," she snapped. "I did it under the table because she is irresponsible with bank accounts." Jason shifted in his seat. The leather creaked loudly. He was looking at the bank statements I had highlighted. He picked one up, holding it as if it were a piece of evidence in a murder investigation. "Maddie," Jason said. His voice was low, confused. "You told me you wired her $2,000 in October. We had a fight about it because we had to cancel the weekend in Aspen. You showed me the transfer confirmation on your phone." Madison froze. She looked at him, her eyes widening in panic. I did," she stammered. "It must have gone to a different account. Maybe she has a secret account she is hiding." I leaned forward. "I do not have a secret account." "Madison," I said calmly, "and neither do you. But since we are talking about secrets, I think we should talk about the reputation management you have been doing behind my back." I reached into my bag and pulled out another sheet of paper. It was a printed email thread. "This is an email you sent to Aunt Linda last month." I said. I slid it across the table toward my mother. She picked it up, her hands trembling. I read the highlighted section aloud. Madison wrote, "I am honestly scared for Ava. She's becoming dangerous. She's been threatening to contact my bosses and ruin my career if I do not give her money. I am terrified she is going to show up at my office and cause a scene. Please do not tell Mom and Dad. I do not want to worry them, but I am living in fear of what she might do next." My mother looked up from the paper. Her face was pale. "Madison." My mother whispered, "You told Linda that Ava was blackmailing you." Madison stood up, her chair scraping screechingly against the floor. "She is," Madison shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is doing it right now. Look at this. She is ruining everything. She is jealous that I have a real job and a real life, so she makes up these lies to tear me down." Mom looked at me. The old habits were fighting to surface. She wanted to believe Madison. It was easier to believe that I was the villain than to accept that her golden child was a liar. "Ava," my mother said, her voice wavering, "you do tend to exaggerate things. Maybe Madison felt threatened. You can be very intense." I did not get angry. I did not defend my intensity. I simply reached into the envelope one last time. "I exaggerate," I asked softly. I pulled out a single, small piece of paper. It was a screenshot of a text message from my mother, sent 2 years ago on Christmas Eve. "You said I exaggerate the way this family treats me." I said, "You said I made up the fact that I am not welcome." I placed the paper in front of my father. "Read it, Dad," I said. My father looked down. He read the words his wife had typed with her own thumbs. The text read, "Ava, honestly, it is better if you do not come tonight. You make everyone uncomfortable. You are an embarrassment to us every time you open your mouth. Just stay in your apartment and let us have a nice holiday." My father stared at the paper. He read it once, then twice. He looked at my mother. "You sent this?" he asked. His voice was barely a whisper. My mother flinched. I was stressed. "Douglas, you remember how she was acting that year? She was wearing those thrift store clothes and you told our daughter she was an embarrassment." My father said. He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. It was shame. Not shame of me, but shame of himself. He looked at the contract with the $150,000 figure, and then at the text message calling me a failure. The cognitive dissonance was shattering his worldview in real time. The room was spiraling. Madison was pacing behind her chair, breathing hard. My mother was weeping silently. My father was staring at the table like it was a graveyard. And then, a sound cut through the chaos. Buzz, buzz. It was Jason's phone. It was sitting on the small table next to his water glass. The screen lit up with a bright, urgent notification. Jason ignored it at first, his eyes still fixed on the bank statements, but the phone buzzed again, and then a third time. He frowned. He picked it up. "Who is calling you on Christmas Eve?" Madison snapped. "Happy for the distraction." Jason looked at the screen, his brow furrowed. "It is not a call," he said. "It is an email notification. It is marked high priority." He unlocked the phone. He tapped the screen. As he read, the color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. He looked up at Madison, his eyes wide with horror. "Madison," he said, "why am I getting a carbon copy of an email from the compliance department at Brightwave?" Madison stopped pacing. She went still. What she asked, her voice was a whisper. Jason held the phone up. His hand was shaking. "It is from the Fraud and Corporate Compliance Division." Jason read, his voice trembling. "Subject immediate inquiry regarding unauthorized corporate card usage." Madison lunged for the phone. "Give me that." Jason pulled it back, standing up. He was taller than her, and for the first time, he looked angry. "No," he shouted. He looked at the screen again, reading rapidly. "Dear Ms. Flores, we have flagged a series of irregular transactions totaling $12,000 on your corporate expense account. These charges appear to be for high-end interior furnishings from Lux Living Designs, purchased between October and December. As these do not align with client entertainment or office supply protocols, and we have no record of these items in the office inventory, we require an immediate explanation regarding the location of these assets." Jason looked at Madison. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "Lux Living Designs," he said. "That is where we got the new sectional sofa and the dining table." Madison was shaking her head frantically. "No, Jason, listen to me. It is a mistake. It is a coding error. I can explain it on Monday." Jason looked at the bank statements on the table, the ones Madison claimed showed money going to me. Then he looked at the email. "You told me you bought that furniture with your bonus," Jason said. "You told me you used your savings to help Ava. So we had to be tight with money. But then you bought the sofa to cheer yourself up." He looked at me. "You never got any money." "Did you?" Jason asked me. I shook my head. "No, Jason, I did not." He turned back to Madison. "You put the furniture on the company card," he said, his voice rising in disbelief. "And you told me the money from our joint savings went to Ava, but you kept it, or you spent it on something else." I watched the pieces click into place for him. The hero narrative Madison had constructed was not just a lie, it was a cover for embezzlement. She needed a reason for why her finances were tight, why she could not afford the cabin trip, why she needed access to his savings. I was the perfect excuse. I was the black hole she claimed was sucking up all her cash, while in reality, she was living beyond her means and charging it to her employer. I spoke up then. My voice was quiet, but in the silent room, it sounded like a gavel. "You told everyone you were sacrificing for me." I said, "You told Mom and Dad you were paying my rent? You told Jason you were sending me thousands of dollars. But the truth is, you were stealing from your company to buy luxury furniture, and you used my name to launder your reputation." I looked at her. "That $12,000 is not in my bank account." "Madison, it is sitting in your living room." Madison looked around the room. She looked for an ally. She looked at Mom. But Mom was staring at Jason's phone with a look of horror. She looked at Dad. But Dad was still looking at the text message he had not known about. She looked at Rowan. "Rowan," she pleaded, "you have to stop them. They are ganging up on me. This is hostile. You are supposed to protect me." Rowan stood up. He closed his notebook. He picked up the email printout I had sent him earlier and placed it neatly in his bag. "Madison," Rowan said, his voice cold and final. "I was hired to mediate a family conflict. I was not hired to be an accessory to corporate fraud." He looked at her with a gaze that stripped away every layer of her defense. "If there is a misappropriation of funds at your workplace, and if you have been using your sister's name to conceal financial irregularities in your personal life, that is a legal matter, not a therapeutic one." He turned to my parents. "I think we are done here. The dynamic in this room is indeed toxic, but the source is not the person you identified as the problem file." Madison let out a scream. It was a primal, ugly sound of rage. "You are all against me," she shrieked. She grabbed the stack of bank statements from the table and threw them into the air. The papers fluttered down like snow, scattering across the expensive rug. "I did everything for this family. I was the perfect one. I was the one who made you look good. And now you are going to take her side, the loser, the one who lives in a studio apartment." She pointed at me, her face twisted with venom. "She tricked you. She is jealous. She probably called my company. She probably reported me." I stood up. I did not flinch at her screaming. I stood tall in my charcoal suit, the lead brand architect of a multi-million-dollar project. "I did not call your company, Madison." I said, "I did not have to. You did this to yourself. You thought you could use me as a shield forever. You thought I would stay quiet because I was weak." I stepped closer to the table, looking her dead in the eye. "But you forgot one thing. I am not the character you wrote anymore, and I am done playing the villain in your story so you can feel like the hero." Madison looked around the room one last time. Jason had stepped away from her, standing closer to the door. My parents were sitting in stunned silence, unable to look at her. Rowan was packing his bag. For the first time in her life, the spotlight was on her, and there was no applause. There was only the harsh, exposing glare of the truth. And she was standing in the center of it, completely and utterly alone. Rowan stood up. The movement was not aggressive, but it was final. He capped his pen with a sharp click that echoed in the sudden silence of the sunroom. The papers that Madison had thrown were scattered across the Persian rug like debris from a crash, and in a way, that is exactly what they were. "I am pausing this session," Rowan announced. His voice was no longer the soft, encouraging tone of a facilitator. It was the hard, steel-edged voice of a man who had seen enough He looked around the circle, making eye contact with each person. We have reached a point where productive dialogue is impossible because the foundation of this gathering, the premise that Ava is the problem, has been proven false. We need to bifurcate this meeting. There are now two distinct issues here. One is the legal and financial crisis Madison has created for herself with her employer and her partner. That is a matter for lawyers and human resources. And frankly, it is outside the scope of my practice. He turned his gaze to my parents. The second issue is the family dynamic, and that, Douglas and Karen, is squarely on you. My mother bristled. She was clutching her pearls. A gesture so cliché it would have been funny if the moment were not so tragic. "How dare you?" she spat. "We hired you to help us. We hired you to bring this family together." Rowan shook his head slowly. "No, Karen. You hired me to fix a scapegoat. In my profession, we see this often. A family system becomes dysfunctional, and instead of addressing the rot at the core, the parents select one child to be the vessel for all their anxiety and shame. You chose Ava. You decided she was the failure so that you could feel successful. You decided she was the chaos so that you could feel in control." He gestured to Madison, who was now sitting with her head in her hands, rocking slightly. "You allowed Madison to construct a fantasy world where she was the savior, and you eagerly believed every lie she told because it flattered you. That is not discipline. That is not parenting. That is emotional abuse, and you have been complicit in it for decades." My mother's face turned a blotchy purple. She pointed a shaking finger at Rowan. "She got to you," she shouted. "Ava got to you. I do not know what she told you in those emails, or how much she paid you, but you are biased. You are supposed to be neutral." Rowan did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at her with a profound, weary disappointment. "I was hired by Madison," he reminded her. "The check for my retainer came from her account, or, as we now suspect, perhaps from her company's account. Ava has not paid me a dime. My duty is to the truth. My duty is to reality. And the reality is that your daughter Ava is a successful, independent woman whom you have treated like a delinquent. I am not defending a paymaster. I am defending a human being who has been systematically targeted by her own blood." The room fell silent again. My father was staring at the floor. He looked older than he had an hour ago. The bluster, the corporate confidence, the air of the patriarch, it was all gone. He looked like a man who had just realized his entire legacy was built on quicksand. Jason cleared his throat. He was standing near the doorway, distancing himself physically from Madison. "I want to say something," Jason said. His voice was steady, though his hands were clenched at his sides. He looked at my parents. "I have been with Madison for 3 years. In all that time, I have never once seen Ava ask for money. I have never seen her act unstable. I have never seen her do anything but show up, be polite, and leave." He looked at me, and his eyes were filled with apology. Every single thing I knew about Ava came from Madison. Every story about the debts, the mental breakdowns, the begging, it was all secondhand. I believed it because I loved Madison, and I thought she was honest. But I am looking at the bank statements. I am reading the email from the fraud department, and I realize now that I was just a prop. I was just another audience member for the show. My father looked up. He turned his head slowly toward Madison. "Madison," he asked. It was a single word, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of misplaced pride. Madison looked up. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks. She looked terrified, but not because she was sorry. She was terrified because she had lost the audience. "Why?" my father asked. His voice broke. "Why did you make all of this up? Why did you tell us your sister was failing? Why did you lie about the money? We gave you everything. You did not need to do this." I held my breath. I had waited 31 years for this question. I had waited my entire life for someone to ask why the golden child needed to stand on my neck to feel tall. Madison wiped her nose with the back of her hand. She looked at me with a look of pure, distilled resentment. "Because it was easy," she whispered. She looked at our parents, her eyes pleading for understanding that would never come again. Because as long as Ava was the loser, I was the winner. As long as she was the mess, I was the perfection. I needed you to look at me like that. I needed to be the one who saved the day. And she just sat there and took it. It made me feel good. It made me feel better than her. She gestured vaguely at the luxury furniture in the living room, the physical evidence of her theft. I just wanted to look the part, she said, her voice trailing off into a whimper. I just wanted to be what you wanted. The confession hung in the air, ugly and small. There was no grand villainy, no complex scheme. It was just vanity. It was just a desperate, pathetic need to be the favorite, bought at the price of my dignity. Rowan stepped back to the center of the circle. I think we have reached the end of what can be achieved here tonight, he said. He looked at me. Ava, I am going to propose a boundary. If your family wishes to have any relationship with you moving forward, it must be conditional. They must cease all dissemination of false information regarding your finances and your mental health. If they continue to slander you to relatives or community members, I am willing to provide an affidavit regarding what transpired here tonight. You have grounds to build a case for harassment and psychological abuse. I looked at Rowan. He was offering me a weapon. He was offering me a way to punish them, to drag them through the legal system, to make them pay in a court of law. But as I looked at them, my father broken, my mother in denial, my sister exposed as a petty fraud, I realized I did not want to punish them. Punishment would require me to stay engaged. Punishment would require me to keep thinking about them. I stood up. I picked up my leather bag. I checked to make sure the zipper was closed. I do not need a lawsuit, I said quietly. I looked at my parents. I am not asking for an apology. I know you do not have one to give. I know that if you admitted what you did to me, it would destroy the version of yourselves you see in the mirror. And frankly, I do not care enough to watch that happen. I walked to the edge of the circle, but I will promise you this. I will never again sit in a circle where I'm labeled the problem. I will never again walk into a house where I'm tolerated rather than celebrated. You have spent my entire life telling me I am too much and not enough at the same time. Tonight, you saw the truth. I am the only person in this room who is standing on their own 2 feet. I turned to Rowan. I extended my hand. Thank you. Rowan, I said. He shook my hand firmly. Thank you for what he asked. Thank you for seeing me, I said. It was the only thing I had ever wanted. Not money, not praise, just to be seen. I turned and walked toward the hallway. Ava, my father called out. He stood up, knocking his chair over. You cannot just leave. It is Christmas Eve. I stopped at the door. I did not turn around. You cannot walk out on your family, my mother cried, her voice shrill with panic. It is ungrateful. We are still your parents. You cannot leave us with this mess. I turned my head slightly. I am not leaving you with a mess. I said, I am leaving you with the truth. You are the ones who have to live with it. But it is Christmas, my mother pleaded. You are ruining the tradition, I smiled. A sad, final smile. Christmas is not a stage for you to humiliate me and call it tradition, I said. I walked out the front door. Behind me, I heard Madison scream. It was a high, jagged sound. The sound of a child who realizes the toy is broken and no one is going to fix it. You ruined everything, she shrieked. You ruin everything you touch. But her voice sounded distant. It sounded like it was coming from inside a television in another room. It did not touch me. The silence of the rest of the house, the silence of Jason packing his things, the silence of my father realizing his retirement was likely going to be spent paying for Madison's legal defense was far louder than her screaming. I stepped out onto the porch. The cold air hit my face like a blessing. It was crisp and clean. Snow was falling gently, covering the perfectly manicured lawns of Silver Ridge in a blanket of white. I walked to my car. My boots crunched on the snow. It was the only sound in the world. I got in. I threw the bag onto the passenger seat. The binder, the contracts, the bank statements, they were just paper now. They had done their job. I started the engine. The heat kicked on. I looked back at the house one last time. The lights were still blazing in the windows. From the outside, It still looked like a postcard. It still looked like the perfect American home. But I knew what was inside. I knew the rot that was eating the foundation. I put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. I did not drive fast. I drove with the steady, deliberate pace of someone who has nowhere to be but her own life. As I turned the corner and the house disappeared from my rearview mirror, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not joy. It was not triumph. It was lighter than that. It was the absence of weight. The anchor was gone. The rope was cut. I thought about the video I had recorded for myself earlier that day. I thought about the woman in the mirror who had told me to be strong. This meeting did not heal my family. I whispered to the empty car. I watched the snow swirl in my headlights. It healed me. Because finally, after 31 years, I stopped auditioning for a role in a play I never wanted to be in. I stopped trying to rewrite their script. I just walked out of the theater. And the air out here is so much better. If your family has ever turned you into a punchline to keep their image polished, or if you have ever been the one designated to carry the shame for everyone else, please remember this. You have the right to walk out of that room. You have the right to drop the rope. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Before you click away, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been the problem child who was actually the only one holding it together? Have you ever had to bring receipts to a family dinner just to prove you exist? I read every single comment, and I want you to know. You are not crazy. You are just the only one who is awake. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about finding justice and reclaiming your power, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel. Hit the like button to help us grow. And if this story resonated with you, press that hype button so more people can hear it. Your support means the world. Stay strong and keep your receipts.